Hey everyone, tonight we begin with a tale that will make you grateful for modern concepts like innocent until proven guilty and evidence-based justice. Because we're diving into the Salem witch trials of 1692, where your neighbour's petty grudge could literally get you hanged, and where the difference between life and death often came down to whether you could recite the Lord's Prayer without stumbling over a single word while standing on the gallows with a noose around your neck. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's February 1692 in Salem Village, Massachusetts, and you're just trying to live your life in this tight-knit Puritan community where everyone knows everyone else's business, down to what you had for breakfast and how many times you coughed during Sunday service. The winter has been particularly brutal, the kind of cold that seeps through your wooden walls and makes your bones ache, even when you're huddled next to the fire. Food is scarce, because last year's harvest was poor, and everyone's nerves are frayed from months of rationing and uncertainty. But it's not just the weather making people edgy. There are deep, festering tensions running through Salem Village, like infected wounds that never quite heal. You've got the Porter family on one side, wealthy merchants who think the village should focus on trade and commerce. On the other side, there's the Putnam clan, old farming families who believe Salem Village is becoming too worldly, too concerned with profit instead of godliness. These aren't just philosophical differences, they're personal vendettas that have been building for decades over land disputes, church politics, and who gets to control the village's future. The church situation is particularly toxic. Reverend Samuel Ferris arrived 3 years ago, and he's managed to alienate a significant portion of his congregation with his fire and brimstone preaching, and his constant demands for more money, more firewood, more deference to his authority. Half the village thinks he's a greedy, paranoid troublemaker. The other half sees him as a godly man under attack by Satan's agents. There's no middle ground in Salem Village. You're either with Ferris or against him, and everyone knows exactly which side everyone else is on. Into this powder keg of social tension, economic stress, and religious conflict comes the spark that will ignite everything. 2 little girls having fits that no one can explain. Betty Ferris, the Reverend's 9-year-old daughter, and Abigail Williams, his 11-year-old niece, start exhibiting behaviours that terrify their Puritan household. They're crawling under furniture, making weird barking sounds, contorting their bodies into impossible positions, and claiming that invisible hands are pinching and choking them. Now, if you're living in Salem Village in 1692, you don't have access to modern medical knowledge about hysteria, seizure disorders, or psychological trauma. What you do have is a worldview that sees the devil's influence everywhere, especially in a community that's already convinced it's under spiritual attack. When Dr. William Griggs examines the girls and can't find any physical cause for their symptoms, he delivers the diagnosis that will doom 20 people to death. The evil hand is upon them. That phrase, the evil hand, is like a match thrown into a room full of gunpowder, witchcraft. The word spreads through Salem Village faster than news of a barn fire. And suddenly every whispered conversation, every sideways glance, every old grudge takes on sinister new meaning. The girls aren't just sick, they're victims of supernatural attack, which means someone in the community is in league with the devil. Here's where your personal nightmare begins, because being accused of witchcraft in Salem isn't random, Ian. It follows patterns that are both predictable and terrifying. Are you a woman? That immediately puts you at risk, because about 80% of those accused will be female. The Puritan mindset sees women as inherently more susceptible to Satan's temptations, more likely to be swayed by promises of power or revenge. Are you past childbearing age? Even worse, because a woman who can't fulfill her primary biological function is seen as potentially useless to God, but still useful to the devil. Do you own property that someone else might covet? Have you been involved in legal disputes over land, inheritance, or debts? Have you ever spoken back to authority figures, expressed opinions that don't align perfectly with Puritan orthodoxy, or shown any sign of independence that might be interpreted as pride or rebellion? Congratulations, you've just painted a target on your back in a community that's looking for someone to blame for their troubles. But here's what makes Salem particularly insidious. Even if you don't fit the typical victim profile, you can still find yourself in mortal danger if you make the wrong enemies or simply have bad luck. Take John Proctor, a prosperous farmer in his 60s who owned 700 acres and was generally respected in the community. His fatal mistake was publicly questioning the validity of the witch trials, suggesting that the afflicted girls might be lying or deluded. That criticism reached the wrong ears, and suddenly Proctor found himself accused not just of witchcraft, but of being the ringleader of a diabolic conspiracy. Or consider Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother who was so well regarded that 39 of her neighbors signed a petition defending her character when she was accused. She was known for her piety, her charitable works, and her role as a peacemaker in community disputes. None of it mattered. Once her name was spoken by the afflicted girls during one of their fits, her reputation became not a shield but a weapon used against her. Because if such a seemingly godly woman could be corrupted by Satan, then clearly the devil's influence was more powerful and widespread than anyone had imagined. Let's put you in the shoes of Sarah Osborne, because her story illustrates how quickly a normal life can become a death sentence in Salem. You're a woman in your late 60s, widowed and remarried, to your former indentured servant, already scandalous behavior in Puritan society, where social hierarchies are considered divinely ordained. You've been embroiled in a legal dispute with the Putnam family over your late husband's estate, claiming that your new husband should inherit the property rather than it going to your stepsons. This has made you enemies among some of the most influential families in Salem Village. Your church attendance has been sporadic lately, partly because of your ongoing health problems and partly because you've grown tired of Reverend Parris's increasingly aggressive sermons about Satan's influence in the community. In a society where missing church is seen as a sign of spiritual weakness or rebellion, your absences have been noted and discussed. You're not particularly popular, not particularly powerful, and not particularly protected by family connections or social standing. When Betty Parris and Abigail Williams start naming names during their fits, yours comes up almost immediately. The accusation hits like a physical blow, because you understand instantly that this isn't just a legal problem. It's a death sentence waiting to be carried out. In Salem, the accusation itself is considered evidence. The logic is circular and impossible to escape. If children are having fits in your presence, it must be because your spectre is attacking them. If your spectre is attacking them, it's because you've made a pact with the devil. If you've made a pact with the devil, then you're guilty of witchcraft, and the penalty for witchcraft is death. The first sign of how hopeless your situation is comes during the preliminary examination on March 1st, 1692. You're brought before magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin in the Salem Village Meeting House, which is packed wall to wall with spectators who've come to witness what they believe will be the exposure of Satan's agents in their midst. The atmosphere is electric with anticipation and barely contained hysteria. This isn't a trial in any sense we'd recognize today. It's more like a public interrogation designed to extract a confession and identify other supposed witches. The magistrates aren't interested in determining your innocence. They're already convinced of your guilt and are simply trying to get you to admit it and implicate others. The whole proceeding is based on the assumption that the accusations are true and that your denials are lies inspired by the devil. The moment you're escorted into the meeting house, the afflicted girls begin their performance. They shriek as if in agony, writhe on the floor as if being tortured by invisible forces, and point at you as the source of their torment. If you look at them, they cry out that your gaze is burning them. If you move your hands, they mirror the movement exactly, claiming that you're forcing them to do it through supernatural power. If you shift your weight or adjust your position, they react as if you've struck them with invisible blows. Magistrate Hathorne, who will later become the model for the judge in Arthur Miller's The Crucible, approaches the questioning with absolute certainty of your guilt. His questions aren't, "Did you do this?" but rather, "How long have you been consorting with the devil? And what other witches have you been meeting with?" When you deny the charges, he treats your denials as further evidence of your guilt. After all, everyone knows that witches are compulsive liars who will never admit their sins willingly. Sarah Osborne, Hathorne begins, his voice carrying the authority of both earthly and divine justice. "These children are tormented by your spectre. Why do you hurt them? You try to explain that you're not doing anything, that you're simply standing there answering questions, but your protests sound hollow against the dramatic testimony of the girls. They're claiming they can see your spectre, your ghostly double leaving your body to attack them. They describe in vivid detail how your spectre pinches them, chokes them, and tries to force them to sign the devil's book. I am innocent to a witch, you reply, using the phrase that many of the accused will repeat. I know not what a witch is. But innocence has become impossible to prove in Salem's twisted logic. The spectral evidence is considered the most reliable form of testimony, because, according to Puritan theology, the devil cannot take the shape of an innocent person. If the girls can see your spectre committing evil acts, then you must have given Satan permission to use your form. The crowd in the meeting house believes what they're seeing. Young girls in apparent agony, pointing at you as the source of their supernatural torment. Many of these spectators are your neighbours, people who've known you for years, but they're watching you now with a mixture of fear, disgust, and righteous anger. The transformation is complete. You're no longer Sarah Osborne, a difficult woman with some questionable life choices. You're a witch, an agent of Satan, an enemy of God and the community. After the preliminary examination, you're taken to Salem jail to await trial. The jail is a stone building that's overcrowded, unsanitary, and designed more for punishment than containment. You're crammed into a cell with other accused witches, sleeping on straw that's rarely changed, and eating food that's barely fit for animals. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, human waste, fear and despair all mixing together in the confined space. But the physical conditions, horrible as they are, pale beside the psychological torture of knowing that every day brings you closer to a trial where your life will depend not on evidence or logic, but on the theatrical performances of your accusers and the predetermined beliefs of your judges. You watch as some prisoners are taken away for their trials and never return. Others come back briefly to gather their few possessions before being led to Gallows Hill for execution. The jailkeeper charges you for your room and board, a cruel irony that means even if you're eventually found innocent, you'll be financially ruined by the experience. Families mortgage their farms and sell their possessions to pay the fees for imprisoned relatives. Some prisoners die in jail from the conditions, saving the community the expense of a trial, but leaving their families with crushing debts and the stigma of having harboured a suspected witch. During your months in jail, You have plenty of time to think about how you ended up in this nightmare. The signs were there if you'd known how to read them. Nigh to the way certain neighbours had started avoiding you after your remarriage. The suspicious looks when you missed church services, the whispered conversations that stopped when you approached. Salem village had been preparing for this witch hunt for years, building up the tensions and resentments that would eventually explode into mass hysteria. The trial itself, when it finally comes, is held before the specially created Court of Oyer and Terminer, a name that means to hear and determine, but which in practice means to convict and execute. Chief Justice William Stoughton approaches each case with absolute certainty of the defendant's guilt. He sees himself as God's instrument in purging Satan's influence from Massachusetts, and he's not about to let legal technicalities interfere with divine justice. The rules of evidence that govern the court make conviction almost inevitable. Spectral evidence, testimony about what the accusers claim to see your ghost doing, is not only admissible, but considered among the most compelling forms of proof. The reasoning is that innocent people cannot be impersonated by Satan. So if witnesses see your spectre committing evil acts, you must be guilty. This creates an impossible situation where your physical presence at the time of alleged supernatural attacks becomes irrelevant. The afflicted girls, now experienced performers after months of practice, put on a show that would be impressive if lives weren't hanging in the balance. They've perfected their craft, learning exactly how to time their fits for maximum dramatic impact, how to describe their supernatural torments in vivid detail, and how to implicate new victims while maintaining their credibility as innocent sufferers. When you're brought into the courtroom, they begin screaming immediately. There she is. There's Goody Osborne. She's hurting us. Make her stop. They writhe on the floor, claiming that your spectre is attacking them, even as you stand motionless in the dock. If you look at them, they shriek that your gaze is torture. If you look away, they claim you're sending your spectre to attack them from another angle. The witnesses against you present a mixture of old grievances, dressed up as supernatural encounters, and convenient memories of incidents that suddenly seem sinister in hindsight. That argument you had with neighbour Mary about her chickens getting into your garden. She now remembers that the very next day, one of her hens died mysteriously, clearly the result of your witchcraft. The nightmares another neighbour had after your property dispute. Obviously your spectre visiting her in the night to torment her dreams. Every unusual or unfortunate event that has occurred within miles of your home becomes potential evidence of your supernatural malevolence. Cows giving sour milk, children falling ill, tools breaking at inconvenient times, horses refusing to cross certain bridges, all of it gets attributed to your evil influence. The community's collective memory becomes remarkably selective, remembering every coincidence that might support the witchcraft charges while forgetting all the times when bad things happened with no connection to you whatsoever. Your defense options are severely limited by the court's procedures and assumptions. You can't effectively cross-examine witnesses because challenging their testimony is seen as further evidence of your guilt. You can't present alternative explanations for the evidence because Salem's worldview doesn't allow for coincidence or natural causes when witchcraft has been alleged. You can't question the credibility of the afflicted girls because they're seen as innocent victims whose suffering proves the reality of the supernatural attacks. Character witnesses might testify on your behalf, but their testimony carries little weight against the dramatic fits and detailed accusations of the afflicted girls. Worse, anyone who defends you too vigorously risks being accused themselves. The witch hunt has created an atmosphere where association with the accused becomes dangerous, and even family members sometimes distance themselves to avoid suspicion. The most tragic aspect of your situation is that the one strategy that might save your life, confession, requires you to destroy your soul and implicate innocent neighbours. Those who confess and provide names of other supposed witches are often spared execution, kept alive to serve as witnesses in future trials. But this salvation comes at an enormous cost. You must admit to crimes you didn't commit, validate the entire witch hunt by confirming that witchcraft is real and widespread, and help destroy your community by naming others as your supposed accomplices. Some of the accused choose this path. Tituba, Reverend Paris's slave from Barbados, becomes the first to confess, spinning elaborate tales of devil worship, flying through the air to attend witch meetings, and signing Satan's book with her own blood. Her confession saves her life, but fuels the hysteria by confirming the community's worst fears about the extent of demonic influence in Salem. Others, like Giles Corey, choose a different form of resistance. When pressed to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, Corey remains silent. Under English law, he cannot be tried without entering a plea. But there's a procedure for compelling a plea: peine forte, edure, or pressing. Heavy stones are placed on Corey's chest, with more weight added each day until he either enters a plea or dies. Corey's ordeal lasts 2 days. Witnesses report that he spoke only twice during the entire process. When Sheriff George Corwin asked him to confess and end his suffering, Corey replied, "I will not plead. If you have more weight, give me more weight." His final words were reportedly a curse on Sheriff Corwin, prophesying that Corwin would die a bad death. A prophecy that came true when Corwin died suddenly of a heart attack a few years later. Corey's choice to die under the stones rather than stand trial was strategic as well as principled. If he had been tried and convicted, his property would have been confiscated by the government, leaving his family destitute. By dying without a conviction, he ensured that his estate would pass to his heirs, but his death also served as a powerful statement about the illegitimacy of the entire proceeding. He would rather be crushed to death than participate in Salem's mockery of justice. If you choose to maintain your innocence right up to the scaffold, you join the ranks of those who paid the ultimate price for their refusal to confess to crimes they didn't commit. The procession to Gallows Hill is a public spectacle, with crowds gathering to witness what they believe is the triumph of good over evil. You're loaded into a cart with other condemned prisoners, travelling the rough, rocky road from Salem jail to the outcropping where the executions take place. The hanging itself is brutal and often botched. This isn't the quick neck-breaking drop of later, more humane executions. It's strangulation by rope, a slow and agonizing death that can take several minutes. The executioner isn't a trained professional, but a local man doing an unpleasant job, and he doesn't always get the knot placement or the drop distance right. Some of the condemned thrash and struggle at the end of the rope, while the crowd watches, convinced they're witnessing the final battle between good and evil. Several of the victims use their final moments to proclaim their innocence one last time. George Burroughs, a former minister, recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly before his execution, something that witches were supposedly unable to do. His flawless recitation causes murmurs in the crowd, and some begin to question whether they might be watching the execution of an innocent man. But Cotton Mather, the influential minister who has been one of the strongest supporters of the trials, quickly addresses the crowd from horseback, reminding them that Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light, and that even apparent piety can be a diabolic deception. Rebecca Nurse's execution is particularly tragic because of her age, her reputation for goodness, and the obvious injustice of her condemnation. She maintains her dignity to the end, praying for her accusers and her community, even as they prepare to take her life. Her family is allowed to retrieve her body after the execution, and they bury her in secret on the family property, unable to give her a proper funeral because of the stigma attached to her conviction. John Proctor's execution becomes a defining moment in Salem's descent into madness. A prosperous farmer with a wife and young children, Proctor had made the fatal mistake of publicly questioning the trials. His execution removes one of the few voices of reason and resistance in the community, sending a clear message that even respected men with everything to lose will not be spared if they challenge the witch hunt. But here's the most chilling part of the Salem story. It doesn't end because people suddenly become more rational, compassionate, or willing to admit their mistakes. The witch hunt continues to escalate, with more accusations, more arrests, more trials, and more executions. The afflicted girls become increasingly bold, naming more and more prominent citizens as witches. They accuse ministers, wealthy merchants, and even the wife of Governor William Phips. The turning point comes not from moral awakening, but from political necessity. When the accusations begin reaching too high up the social and political ladder, suddenly the whole proceeding begins to look less like divine justice and more like dangerous hysteria that threatens the stability of the colony. Governor Phips, faced with the prospect of his own wife standing trial for witchcraft, begins to have serious doubts about spectral evidence and the reliability of the afflicted girls. The realization that Salem has gone catastrophically wrong doesn't come gradually. It hits the community like a thunderbolt. Increase Mather, Cotton Mather's father, and one of the most respected ministers in Massachusetts, publishes Cases of Conscience, which questions the use of spectral evidence and suggests that it's better to let 10 guilty witches escape than to execute one innocent person. This theological bombshell undermines the entire foundation of the Salem trials. By October 1692, Governor Phips dissolves the court of Oyer and Terminer and prohibits further arrests for witchcraft. By May 1693, he pardons all remaining prisoners accused of witchcraft. The same community that had been absolutely certain of spectral evidence and supernatural guilt now sees the trials for what they were Mayans, a tragic combination of mass hysteria, social tensions, personal vendettas, and legal procedures that made justice impossible. The aftermath is almost as devastating as the trials themselves. Families are destroyed, the community is fractured by guilt and recrimination, and the economic cost of the trials has bankrupted many residents. Those who confessed under pressure now face the lifelong stigma of having admitted to witchcraft, while the families of the executed struggle with poverty and social ostracism. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges on the court of Oyer and Terminer, eventually issues a public apology, acknowledging his role in the miscarriage of justice. He stands in church while his confession is read aloud, taking full responsibility for his part in the deaths of innocent people. It's a remarkable act of public penance, but it doesn't bring back the dead or heal the community's wounds. The afflicted girls, who had been the center of attention for months, gradually fade from public notice. Some marry and live quiet lives, never speaking publicly about their role in the trials. Others move away from Salem, seeking fresh starts in communities where their past won't follow them. Ann Putnam Jr., one of the primary accusers, eventually makes a public apology, admitting that she was deluded by Satan and asking forgiveness from the families of those she had helped condemn. But apologies and pardons come too late for the 20 people who died on Gallows Hill and in jail. They remain dead, victims of a system that confused fear with wisdom, spectacle with justice, and certainty with truth. Their deaths serve as a permanent reminder of how quickly civilization can collapse when people abandon reason, evidence, and compassion in favor of scapegoating and mass hysteria. The most terrifying lesson of Salem isn't that people in 1692 were particularly superstitious, cruel, or irrational. It's how quickly a normal community can transform into something monstrous when the right conditions align. Fear of the unknown, economic stress, social tensions, religious extremism, and legal systems that prioritize expedience over justice. These are human tendencies that exist in every society and every era. Salem shows us that the mechanics of persecution, the scapegoating, the social pressures to conform, the legal procedures that make innocence impossible to prove, aren't relics of the past, but ongoing dangers that require constant vigilance to prevent. The witch hunt mentality can resurface anywhere, anytime, whenever people become convinced that their problems are caused by hidden enemies who must be rooted out and destroyed. Walking through modern Salem with its witch museums, Halloween decorations and tourist attractions, it's easy to treat the trials as a quaint historical curiosity, something that happened long ago to people who were less enlightened than we are. But that comfortable distance is an illusion. The same fears, prejudices, and social dynamics that drove Salem exist today, waiting for the right spark to ignite them into another tragedy. The victims of Salem's Sarah Osborne, who died in jail before her trial, Bridget Bishop, the first to be executed, Rebecca Nurse, the grandmother whose goodness couldn't save her, John Proctor, the farmer who spoke truth to power, Giles Corey, who chose to be crushed rather than participate in a sham trial. They died not because they were guilty of witchcraft, but because they lived in a community that had forgotten the difference between fear and evidence, between suspicion and proof, between justice and revenge. In Salem, you wouldn't have lasted a day, not because you were actually a witch, but because witchcraft was never really the issue. The issue was a community under stress, looking for someone to blame, a legal system designed to find guilt rather than establish innocence, and ordinary people who convinced themselves that they were doing God's work while they destroyed their neighbors' lives. The next Salem is always just one moment of collective panic away from any community that forgets these hard-won lessons written in the blood of the innocent. You think keeping food fresh without a refrigerator is challenging? Try surviving an entire medieval winter when your life literally depends on preserving enough food during harvest season to last until spring. When a single miscalculation or stroke of bad luck could mean watching your family slowly starve, and when the difference between eating well and eating tree bark often came down to techniques that would make modern food safety inspectors faint. Picture yourself as a peasant farmer in 13th century England, standing in your small plot of land in late September as the harvest season reaches its peak. The air is crisp with the promise of winter, and you can feel that familiar knot of anxiety forming in your stomach, because you know what's coming. In about 6 weeks, the first killing frost will arrive, ending the growing season completely. After that, nothing will grow again until late spring. That's roughly 7 months, when you and your family will have to survive entirely on whatever food you can preserve, store, and ration during the coming months. This isn't like running out of groceries and making a quick trip to the store. There is no store, there's no backup plan, no safety net, no government assistance program waiting to help if you run short. If you don't preserve enough food during harvest season, people die. It's that simple, that brutal, and that immediate. Every decision you make about food preservation in the next few weeks will determine whether your children see another spring. Let's start with the most crucial element of medieval survival. Grain, wheat, barley, oats, and rye aren't just crops to you. They're your insurance policy against starvation. A typical peasant family needs about 8 to 10 bushels of grain to survive the winter, which sounds manageable until you realize that medieval farming yields are pathetically low by modern standards. Your small plot might produce only 2 or 3 times what you planted, assuming you have good weather, fertile soil, and no diseases or pests. That margin between survival and starvation is terrifyingly thin. But harvesting the grain is only the beginning of your preservation challenges. Medieval grain storage is an art form that requires knowledge passed down through generations, because one mistake can ruin your entire winter food supply. First, you need to ensure the grain is completely dry. Before storage, any moisture will cause mold, rot, or sprouting that will destroy months of work. You spread the grain on wooden floors or stone surfaces, turning it regularly until it reaches the proper dryness. This process can take weeks, and you're racing against time and weather. Your storage containers are hand-woven baskets, sealed with pitch, wooden barrels coopered by the village craftsmen, or if you're fortunate, large ceramic vessels. But even the best containers won't protect your grain from the medieval farmer's greatest enemies: rats, mice, weevils, and moisture. You line your storage areas with stones to keep out ground moisture. Scatter herbs like pennyroyal and tansy to deter insects, and pray that the village cats earn their keep by controlling the rodent population. The most successful medieval grain storage technique involves creating multiple smaller caches rather than putting everything in one location. You might bury sealed pots of grain in different spots around your property, hide smaller containers in the walls of your house, and store the bulk of your supply in the communal village granary. This diversification means that if one storage site fails, if rats get into the granary, or flood damages your buried cache, or fire destroys your house, you won't lose everything at once. Meat preservation presents an entirely different set of challenges, because fresh meat in medieval times is a luxury that exists only briefly after slaughter. When you butcher an animal, you have perhaps 2 days before spoilage begins, and there's no way to keep it fresh longer without preservation techniques that are both labor-intensive and require specific materials that might not always be available. Salting is your primary weapon against meat spoilage, but medieval salt isn't the refined product we know today. If you live inland, salt is an expensive commodity that must be traded for or purchased at market and a significant expense for a peasant family. Coastal communities have access to sea salt, made by evaporating seawater, but this process requires enormous amounts of fuel and labour. Either way, salt is precious, and you need lots of it for proper meat preservation. The salting process itself is more complex than simply covering meat with salt. You must first remove as much blood as possible, since blood accelerates spoilage. Then you pack the meat in layers of salt, ensuring every surface is covered. The salt draws out moisture, creating an environment hostile to the bacteria that cause rot. But you need the right ratio. Too little salt, and the meat spoils too much, and it becomes inedibly salty. Medieval families developed techniques for reusing salt by collecting what drains off the meat, boiling it to remove impurities, and using it again. Smoking meat combines preservation with flavor enhancement, but it requires a dedicated smoking structure and constant attention. You build a small wooden house or use a covered pit, creating a fire that produces steady smoke without too much heat. The process takes days or even weeks, depending on the size of the meat pieces. You use specific woods, oak, apple, or hickory, because different woods impart different flavors and preservation qualities. The smoke creates chemical compounds that inhibit bacterial growth, while the slow dehydration removes moisture that bacteria need to survive. But here's where medieval meat preservation gets really interesting. You don't preserve entire animals at once. Instead, you use every part systematically, preserving different cuts, using different methods based on their characteristics and your family's needs. The best cuts might be salted and hung in your rafters. Tougher pieces go into the smoking house. Fat gets rendered into lard, which becomes both a cooking medium and a preservation tool. You can store cooked meats submerged in rendered fat for months. Organ meats, which spoil faster than muscle tissue, get processed immediately into sausages, puddings, and pâtés. You grind the organs with spices, stuff the mixture into cleaned intestines, and smoke or dry the resulting sausages. Blood gets made into blood pudding or blood sausage before it can clot and spoil. Even bones are valuable. You boil them for marrow and make bone meal that can be stored and used to supplement winter meals with calcium and protein. Fish preservation follows similar principles, but requires different techniques based on the type of fish and your location. If you live near the ocean, you might have access to large fish like cod that can be split, salted, and dried into stockfish, a preservation method so effective that properly prepared stockfish can last for years. The process involves cleaning the fish, removing the backbone while leaving the fish intact, covering it with salt for several weeks, then hanging it in a windy, dry location until it becomes hard as wood. Freshwater fish from rivers and ponds require different handling. Smaller fish can be smoked whole, but larger fish need to be cut into strips for even drying. You also use techniques like pickling in vinegar or wine acidic environments that prevent bacterial growth. Some medieval communities developed fish sauce, similar to modern Asian fish sauces, by allowing fish to ferment in salt brine for months, creating a protein-rich liquid that adds flavor and nutrition to winter meals. Dairy preservation is crucial because milk, cheese, and butter provide essential fats and proteins during winter months when fresh food is scarce. Fresh milk spoils within hours in warm weather, so dairy preservation techniques focus on transforming milk into products that last longer. Cheese making is perhaps the most sophisticated preservation technology available to medieval families, involving complex processes of culturing, aging, and storing that can extend the life of milk proteins for months or even years. The cheese-making process begins with adding rennet to milk, causing it to separate into curds and whey. You drain the whey, press the curds to remove more moisture, then age the resulting cheese in cool, humid conditions. Different aging environments produce different types of cheese, some wrapped in cloth and stored in cellars, others covered in wax, still others aged in caves or buried in sand. The aging process allows beneficial bacteria to continue working while preventing harmful bacteria from taking hold. Butter preservation involves both salting and proper storage techniques. You churn butter from cream, then work salt into it to draw out remaining moisture and create an environment hostile to spoilage bacteria. The salted butter gets packed into wooden firkins or ceramic crocks, covered with more salt or brine, and stored in the coolest available location. Properly preserved butter can last through the winter, providing essential fats for cooking and nutrition. Vegetable preservation presents unique challenges because different vegetables require different techniques, and medieval families must preserve enough variety to prevent malnutrition during the long winter months. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, parsnips, and onions can be stored fresh in root cellars, Arna's underground chambers that maintain steady cool temperatures and high humidity. These cellars are carefully constructed with stone walls, proper drainage, and ventilation to prevent freezing while keeping vegetables dormant. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut through fermentation, a process that not only preserves the vegetable, but actually increases its nutritional value. You shred cabbage, mix it with salt, pack it tightly in wooden barrels or ceramic crocks, and allow beneficial bacteria to ferment the sugars into lactic acid. The acid environment prevents spoilage while creating vitamin C that helps prevent scurvy during winter months when fresh vegetables aren't available. Beans and peas are dried in their pods, then threshed and stored in sealed containers. The drying process must be thorough to prevent mold, but not so aggressive that it damages the seed structure. Properly dried legumes provide essential protein throughout winter and can be ground into flour to supplement grain supplies when bread ingredients run low. Herbs and vegetables can be preserved through various drying techniques. You bundle leafy herbs and hang them in dry, well-ventilated areas. Some vegetables are sliced thin and dried on wooden racks or stone surfaces. Others are made into vegetable leather, bouillie, spread thin, and dried until they form flexible sheets that can be rolled and stored. These dried vegetables provide flavoring and some nutrition during winter months when fresh plants are unavailable. Fruit preservation techniques vary depending on the type of fruit and your family's resources. Apples and pears can be stored fresh in cool cellars if they're perfect specimens without bruises or damage. But most fruit requires active preservation. You dry apples and pears in slices, either in the sun or near your fire. Grapes can be dried into raisins. Plums become prunes through careful dehydration. But medieval families also master more complex fruit preservation techniques. You make fruit leather by cooking fruit into thick pastes, then drying the paste until it becomes flexible sheets. You preserve fruit in honey, which has natural antibacterial properties and can keep fruit edible for months. You make fruit wines and vinegars that serve both as beverages and cooking ingredients throughout winter. The most sophisticated fruit preservation involves creating fruit preserves and jams using honey as a preservative. Honey's low water content and natural enzymes create an environment where bacteria cannot survive. You cook fruit with honey until the mixture reaches the proper consistency, then store it in sealed containers. These preserves provide sweetness and flavor during the long winter months, while preserving some of the fruit's nutritional content. Medieval fermentation techniques extend far beyond simple sauerkraut and cheese. Families learn to ferment grains into beer and ale, which serve as both beverages and nutrition sources. The fermentation process creates B vitamins, while the alcohol content prevents bacterial contamination. Beer becomes a staple drink for all family members, including children, because it's often safer than water and provides calories and nutrients. You also ferment grain into sourdough starters that can last indefinitely with proper care. A sourdough starter is essentially a controlled fermentation of flour and water that captures wild yeasts and beneficial bacteria from the environment. This living culture allows you to make bread without commercial yeast, and a healthy starter can be maintained for years, even decades, by regular feeding and proper storage. Medieval families develop intricate preservation schedules that coordinate multiple preservation activities throughout the harvest season. Late summer brings grain harvest, and the first preservation activities, early fall, sees fruit harvesting and preserving. Late fall brings animal slaughter and meat preservation before winter sets in. Each activity requires specific weather conditions, materials and labor, and timing is crucial for success. The preservation process involves the entire family and often the broader community. Children help with simple tasks like turning drying grain or gathering herbs. Women typically manage dairy preservation, vegetable preparation, and the complex timing required to coordinate multiple preservation activities. Men handle heavy work like building smoking houses, slaughtering animals, and constructing root cellars. Community cooperation becomes essential during preservation season. Families share labor for large tasks like grain threshing or animal slaughter. They trade preservation materials, salt for honey, herbs for vegetables, labor for expertise. The village smith might provide metal tools needed for preservation activities. The miller processes grain for the entire community. Everyone understands that individual family survival depends on community cooperation during these crucial weeks. Storage locations require careful planning and construction. Root cellars must be dug deep enough to prevent freezing, but not so deep that they flood. Grain storage areas need to be dry, well ventilated, and protected from pests. Meat smoking houses require proper ventilation and fire safety. Each storage location serves specific preservation needs and requires maintenance throughout winter to ensure preserved foods remain edible. Medieval families also developed sophisticated inventory management systems to ration preserved foods throughout winter. You can't simply eat whatever you want whenever you want it. Every meal must be planned to ensure food supplies last until spring. Families create mental or simple written inventories of preserved foods, calculating daily rations that will stretch supplies through the entire winter while maintaining adequate nutrition. The rationing process involves careful meal planning that maximizes nutrition while minimizing waste. Breakfast might be ale and bread. Midday meals feature stews that combine small amounts of preserved meat with dried vegetables and grains. Evening meals might include cheese, preserved fruit, and more bread. Every scrap of food has value. Mid-tread crusts become ingredients for other dishes. Vegetable peels go to animals. Bones get boiled multiple times for every bit of nutrition they contain. Winter food preparation requires techniques that maximize flavor and nutrition from preserved ingredients. You learn to rehydrate dried vegetables slowly to restore texture and flavor. You discover spice combinations that complement preserved meats and mask the strong salt taste. You develop bread recipes that incorporate different grains and preserved ingredients to create variety in your limited diet. Medieval preservation techniques also include methods for extending the life of foods that are beginning to spoil. Slightly spoiled meat can be saved by cutting away damaged portions, resalting, and re-smoking. Moldy cheese can sometimes be rescued by removing affected areas and re-aging. Grain that's developed weevils can be sifted, and the remaining clean grain used for food, while the infested portions go to animal feed. The preservation season creates enormous physical and emotional stress for medieval families. The work is back-breaking, lifting heavy containers, standing for hours while stirring preserves, working in smoky environments while tending fires. The pressure is immense because mistakes mean starvation. Family tensions run high as everyone works long hours under deadline pressure, with their lives literally hanging in the balance. But preservation season also brings communities together in ways that modern life rarely duplicates. Neighbors share knowledge, techniques, and labor. Children learn essential survival skills by watching and helping their parents. Families develop traditions around preservation activities, special meals to celebrate successful grain harvest, community gatherings during animal slaughter, festivals to mark the completion of preservation work. The end of preservation season brings both relief and anxiety. Relief because the intense work is finished and food stores are complete. Anxiety because now comes the real test, making those preserved foods last through winter and spring until the next growing season begins. Families take inventory of their preserved foods, calculate rations, and settle in for the long wait until fresh food becomes available again. Medieval food preservation represents one of humanity's most essential survival technologies. These techniques allowed our ancestors to survive in climates and environments where fresh food wasn't available year-round. The knowledge was hard-won through centuries of trial and error, passed down through generations, and constantly refined based on local conditions and available resources. Modern refrigeration has made us forget how precarious food security was for most of human history. Medieval families couldn't run to the grocery store when they ran out of food. They couldn't rely on global transportation networks to bring fresh produce from distant climates. They had to master complex preservation techniques or face starvation during winter months. The psychological impact of this constant food insecurity shaped medieval culture in profound ways. Feast days became celebrations not just of religious significance, but of temporary abundance. Food waste was unthinkable when preservation required such enormous effort. Hospitality customs developed around sharing precious preserved foods with guests. Social hierarchies often reflected who had access to the best preservation techniques and storage facilities. Medieval preservation techniques also demonstrate remarkable ingenuity in working with available resources. Without modern chemicals, equipment, or energy sources, medieval families developed sophisticated methods for extending food life using only natural materials and human labor. They understood principles of chemistry, biology, and nutrition without formal scientific education, applying practical knowledge gained through generations of experience. The variety of preservation techniques reflects the diversity of medieval diets and the need to preserve every possible food source. Nothing edible was wasted, from grain and meat to wild plants and pond fish. Medieval families learned to preserve foods we might consider marginal or unappetizing, because survival required using every available calorie during harsh winter months. Modern attempts to recreate medieval preservation techniques often fail because we lack the practical knowledge that medieval families accumulated over lifetimes of practice. We might understand the scientific principles behind salting meat or fermenting vegetables, but we don't have the intuitive understanding of timing, proportions, and environmental conditions that made the difference between success and failure when your family's survival depended on getting it right. The seasonal rhythm of medieval life revolved around food preservation in ways that modern life has completely lost. Spring meant survival and the beginning of fresh food availability. Summer brought growing season and preparation for preservation. Fall was preservation season, when families worked frantically to prepare for winter. Winter was rationing season, when families carefully consumed their preserved foods while waiting for spring to return. Medieval food preservation also required enormous amounts of fuel for fires used in smoking, drying, and cooking preservation processes. Families spent significant time gathering wood, building and maintaining fires, and managing the various heating needs of different preservation techniques. This fuel requirement influenced settlement patterns, forest management, and even social structures around who controlled access to wood and other fuel sources. The tools and equipment used for medieval food preservation were often handed down through generations and represented significant family investments. A good set of meat hooks, smoking racks, grain storage containers, and preservation tools could mean the difference between successful food preservation and winter starvation. Families protected these tools carefully and maintained them throughout the year for the crucial preservation season. Weather played an enormous role in preservation success or failure. Wet weather during drying season could ruin grain or meat. Early frosts could end the growing season before families finished their preservation work. Mild winters could cause preserved foods to spoil faster than expected. Medieval families learned to read weather signs and adjust their preservation techniques based on seasonal conditions. The knowledge required for successful food preservation was complex and specialized. Families needed to understand optimal timing for different preservation activities, proper techniques for each type of food, storage requirements for different preserved items, and rationing strategies for winter survival. This knowledge was typically passed down from parents to children through hands-on experience during multiple preservation seasons. Medieval food preservation techniques also influenced cooking methods and flavor preferences that persisted long after refrigeration made preservation unnecessary. The strong, salty flavors of preserved meats shaped medieval cooking styles. The use of spices and herbs in preservation influenced medieval cuisine. Fermented foods like bread, beer, and pickled vegetables became cultural staples that continued even when fresh alternatives became available. In medieval times, you wouldn't have lasted a day trying to preserve food without refrigeration, not because the techniques were impossibly difficult, but because successful preservation required a lifetime of accumulated knowledge, community cooperation, proper timing, and often a bit of luck with weather and storage conditions. One mistake, contaminated salt, improper drying, pest infestation, or miscalculated rationing, could mean the difference between a family that survives winter and one that doesn't see spring. The margin for error was non-existent. The stakes were life and death, and the expertise required took generations to develop. You think operating a modern amusement park ride is challenging? Try running a medieval pleasure wheel, the precursor to the Ferris wheel, in 17th century Europe, where your contraption is held together with rope and iron brackets made by the village blacksmith, where your customers are drunk peasants celebrating harvest festival who've never experienced anything higher than a church bell tower, and where one mechanical failure doesn't just mean a lawsuit, it means being dragged before the magistrate for witchcraft, because obviously only Satan could make a wooden wheel spin people through the air. Picture yourself as an itinerant showman in 1620, travelling from village to village across Germany with your most prized possession, a massive wooden wheel that you've somehow convinced people is entertainment rather than an instrument of torture. You've spent months building this contraption in your workshop, using techniques passed down from your father and grandfather, who were among the first to figure out that people will actually pay money to be scared out of their wits. Provided you can convince them it's safe enough that they probably won't die. Your pleasure wheel stands about 20 feet tall, not enormous by modern standards, but absolutely massive by medieval ones, where most people live their entire lives without ever being higher off the ground than they can climb up a ladder. The wheel itself is constructed from heavy oak timbers, joined with iron brackets that cost you a small fortune at various smithies along your travelling route. The whole structure is designed to be assembled and disassembled repeatedly, because you're not building a permanent installation. You're building a portable business that needs to fit into wagons and survive constant travel over medieval roads that are basically just mud paths with delusions of grandeur. The engineering challenges you face would make modern engineers weep. You have no steel cables, no electric motors, no safety inspections, and no standardized parts. Everything is handmade, held together with rope, wooden pegs, and iron hardware that was forged by whatever blacksmith happened to be available in the last town you visited. Your wheel must be strong enough to carry multiple passengers spinning through the air, but light enough to be transported by horse-drawn wagons. It must be stable enough to operate safely, but quick enough to assemble that you can set up and break down in a single day. The passenger compartments are simple wooden boxes, each one carefully balanced and attached to the outer rim of the wheel with heavy rope and iron fittings. There are no safety harnesses, no seat belts, no doors that lock shut. Passengers simply climb into the boxes and hold on for dear life while you spin them around using a combination of human power, counterweights, and occasionally a very patient horse or ox walking in circles around a capstan system that provides the mechanical advantage needed to move the wheel. Your first challenge in any new village is convincing people that your contraption isn't some elaborate form of execution device. Medieval Europeans have a healthy fear of heights, and for good reason. Falling from significant elevation usually means death or permanent injury. Most people have never willingly been more than 10 feet off the ground, and the idea of being spun through the air for entertainment strikes many as either madness or witchcraft. You spend considerable time each day explaining how the wheel works, demonstrating its safety, and convincing skeptical villagers that this is fun rather than suicide. The demonstration process is crucial because word travels fast in small medieval communities. If your first customers scream in terror, vomit from motion sickness, or get injured, you'll find yourself either run out of town or facing serious legal consequences. You typically start with the bravest local volunteers, often young men trying to impress girlfriends or drunk peasants who've lost their fear of death, along with their common sense. These early riders become your marketing team, and their reactions determine whether you'll have customers or an angry mob. Setting up your wheel requires careful attention to ground conditions, local weather, and village politics. You need relatively flat, solid ground that can support the weight of your wheel and the dynamic forces created when it spins. Medieval villages don't have level, paved surfaces. You're working with whatever patch of ground the village authorities allow you to use, which might be the town square, a field outside the village walls, or a spot near the local church during festival season. The assembly process takes most of a day and requires help from local labourers who may or may not understand what they're building. You have detailed knowledge of how each timber fits together, which rope goes where, and how to tension everything properly for safe operation. But your helpers are village carpenters, farm workers, and curious onlookers who've never seen anything like your wheel. Communication barriers, different measurement systems, and varying levels of craftsmanship skills mean that every assembly is a new adventure in problem solving. Weather presents constant challenges that modern amusement park operators never face. Your wheel is entirely made of wood and rope, materials that expand and contract with moisture, lose strength when wet, and become dangerously slippery in rain or snow. A sudden thunderstorm can force you to shut down immediately and secure your wheel against wind damage. Extended wet weather can cause rope to stretch, wood to warp, and metal fittings to rust. You need backup materials for running repairs and the knowledge to assess when conditions make operation too dangerous. Your customer base consists entirely of people who have no experience with mechanical entertainment and no understanding of the physics involved in your wheel. They don't know to distribute their weight evenly in the passenger boxes. They don't understand that sudden movements can affect the wheel's balance. They panic when the wheel stops with them at the top, not realizing that this is normal operation rather than mechanical failure. Many passengers have never experienced motion sickness and don't recognize the early warning signs that they're about to vomit all over themselves and everyone below. Managing intoxicated customers presents special challenges during medieval festival seasons. Village celebrations involve enormous amounts of ale, wine, and various forms of distilled spirits. Drunk peasants think they're invincible and want to ride your wheel multiple times or attempt dangerous stunts while spinning through the air. They also tend to vomit more frequently, fight with other passengers, and make poor decisions about when to board and exit the wheel. You need to balance customer satisfaction with safety concerns, all while dealing with people whose judgment is severely impaired. The payment system for your wheel operates entirely on a cash basis, with no standardized currency. Different villages use different coins, local tokens, or barter systems. You might be paid in silver coins from one customer, copper tokens from another, and a live chicken from a third. This makes pricing complicated and requires you to understand the relative value of various currencies and trade goods across the regions where you travel. You also need to make change using whatever combination of coins and goods you have available. Village authorities present another layer of complexity that modern operators never face. Every town has different rules about traveling entertainers, public gatherings, and mechanical devices. Some villages welcome traveling shows and charge modest fees for operating permits. Others view entertainment as frivolous or potentially dangerous and require extensive negotiations before allowing you to set up. Religious authorities might object to your wheel as encouraging sinful behavior or promoting ungodly pursuits. Local guild members might complain that you're competing with established businesses. The legal environment surrounding your wheel is a patchwork of local laws, traditional customs, and religious restrictions that vary dramatically from place to place. If someone gets injured on your wheel, you might face anything from a simple fine to serious criminal charges, depending on local attitudes toward traveling entertainers and mechanical devices. There's no standardized legal framework for amusement devices, no established precedents for liability, and no appeals process if local authorities decide to hold you responsible for accidents. Mechanical failures happen regularly because your wheel operates under conditions that would horrify modern engineers. Rope stretches and breaks under repeated stress. Wooden joints work loose from constant motion and vibration. Iron fittings crack or bend under load. You carry spare materials and repair tools, but fixing problems often requires stopping operation, removing passengers, and performing repairs with whatever materials and help you can find locally. Every breakdown costs you money and lost revenue, and potentially damages your reputation with current and future customers. Your daily routine begins before dawn, with a complete inspection of every component of your wheel. You check rope tension, examine wooden joints for signs of stress or damage, test iron fittings for cracks or corrosion, and verify that all passenger compartments are securely attached and properly balanced. This inspection process takes considerable time because you're checking hundreds of individual components, any one of which could fail catastrophically if problems aren't caught early. Operating the wheel requires constant attention to passenger safety, mechanical condition, and crowd management. You need to help customers into and out of the passenger compartments safely, ensuring proper weight distribution, and securing any loose clothing or possessions that might create problems during operation. You must monitor the wheel's mechanical condition continuously, listening for unusual sounds, watching for signs of stress or failure, and being ready to stop operation immediately if problems develop. The actual spinning process requires careful control of speed and timing to maximize customer enjoyment while maintaining safety. Too slow, and customers feel cheated out of their money. Too fast, and they panic, become violently ill, or get injured when the wheel stops suddenly. You learn to read your passengers' reactions, screams of delight versus screams of terror, laughter versus sobbing, excited chatter versus ominous silence. Managing the experience requires intuition developed through years of practice and countless interactions with different types of customers. Crowd control becomes increasingly difficult as word spreads about your wheel. Successful operation attracts larger crowds, but medieval villages lack any infrastructure for managing large gatherings. You might find yourself dealing with hundreds of people pressed around your wheel, all trying to get closer, pushing forward to see better, or attempting to climb on your equipment for better views. These crowds create safety hazards, interfere with operation, and sometimes turn hostile if people can't get rides or feel they're being treated unfairly. The seasonal nature of your business means that you must earn enough during traveling season to survive through winter months, when travel becomes impossible and villages are focused on survival rather than entertainment. You typically operate from late spring through early fall, moving constantly to reach villages during their festival seasons and market days. This requires careful planning of travel routes, timing arrivals to coincide with local celebrations, and maintaining relationships with village authorities who control access to operating locations. Competition comes from other traveling entertainers who might offer different but competing forms of entertainment. Puppet shows, dancing bears, traveling musicians, storytellers, and acrobats all compete for the same customer base and often for the same operating locations. You need to differentiate your wheel from other attractions, while sometimes sharing space and customers with competing entertainers. This requires diplomacy, negotiation, and sometimes direct confrontation when territorial disputes arise. Weather delays create cascading problems throughout your traveling season. A week of rain that prevents travel might cause you to miss scheduled appearances at multiple villages, damaging relationships with local authorities and losing anticipated revenue. Storm damage to your wheel might require extensive repairs using materials and craftsmen that aren't available in remote locations. Extended bad weather can force you to shelter in place for weeks, consuming resources without generating income. The maintenance requirements for your wheel are enormous and never-ending. Wood components need regular treatment with oils and waxes to prevent rot and insect damage. Rope must be replaced frequently because the stresses of operation cause gradual deterioration that isn't always visible until failure occurs. Iron fittings require constant attention to prevent rust and corrosion that weakens metal and creates dangerous conditions. Every component has a different maintenance schedule and different warning signs of impending failure. Your knowledge of construction techniques, mechanical principles, and material science is entirely self-taught through years of trial and error. There are no engineering textbooks, no safety standards, no training programs for amusement device operators. Everything you know about building and operating your wheel comes from experience, observation, and information passed down from other traveling entertainers. This knowledge is precious and carefully guarded because it represents your livelihood and your family's survival. Storage and transportation of your wheel components requires specially designed wagons and careful attention to loading and securing materials. The heavy wooden timbers that form your wheel's structure must be packed to prevent damage during travel while maximizing the use of available wagon space. Rope, iron fittings, and tools need protection from weather and theft. The passenger compartments require careful handling to prevent damage that would make them unsafe for customers. The social aspects of operating a traveling wheel create complex relationships with local communities. You're simultaneously an outsider who brings exotic entertainment and a businessman who provides services people want. Some villagers welcome you enthusiastically, others view you with suspicion, and still others see you as a potential threat to local values or safety. Managing these relationships requires diplomatic skills, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to adapt quickly to different community expectations. Religious concerns about your wheel vary significantly across different regions and communities. Some religious authorities view mechanical entertainment as harmless fun that brings joy to hard-working peasants. Others see it as encouraging pride, vanity, or ungodly behavior that distracts people from spiritual concerns. During certain religious seasons, entertainment might be forbidden entirely, forcing you to time your visits carefully to avoid conflicts with local religious calendars. The economic impact of your visits to small villages can be significant because you represent an unusual cash-generating opportunity for local residents. People spend money they normally save for essentials, creating temporary economic activity that benefits local merchants, tavern keepers, and food vendors. However, this same economic impact can create resentment among established business people who feel you're taking money that would otherwise support local enterprises. Night operations present special challenges because medieval lighting technology is primitive and dangerous. Torches and lanterns provide minimal illumination and create fire hazards around your wooden wheel. Operating in darkness makes it impossible to properly inspect your equipment or monitor passenger safety. Most of your business happens during daylight hours, which limits your revenue potential but reduces safety risks significantly. Emergency procedures for your wheel are entirely improvised because there are no established protocols for mechanical entertainment devices. If someone gets injured, you need to provide immediate care using whatever medical knowledge you possess and whatever help is available locally. Serious injuries require transportation to the nearest town with a physician or surgeon, which might be days away by wagon over rough roads. The end-of-season breakdown process is as complex as initial assembly, but must be completed quickly before winter weather makes travel impossible. Every component must be cleaned, inspected for damage, and properly stored to survive months of inactivity. Worn or damaged parts need replacement or repair before the next season begins. The entire wheel must be disassembled and packed for winter storage in whatever shelter you can find or afford. Your winter planning involves securing storage space for your wheel, finding income sources during the off-season, and preparing for the next traveling season. You might work as a carpenter, help with construction projects, or provide other services that use your mechanical skills. You also use winter months to build replacement components, improve your wheel's design, and plan travel routes for the coming year. The physical demands of operating a traveling wheel are enormous and relentless. You're constantly lifting heavy timbers, tensioning rope systems, operating manual mechanisms to spin the wheel, and performing maintenance tasks that require significant strength and endurance. The work is physically exhausting, especially when combined with the stress of managing customers, maintaining safety, and dealing with mechanical problems. Personal safety becomes a constant concern because you're operating dangerous mechanical equipment without modern safety systems or emergency services. A rope failure could send you flying along with your customers. A structural collapse could crush anyone nearby. Equipment malfunctions can happen without warning, leaving you with only seconds to react and protect yourself and your customers from serious injury or death. The psychological pressure of operating a medieval pleasure wheel is intense because people's lives literally depend on your mechanical knowledge and decision-making. Every time you start the wheel spinning, you're responsible for the safety of customers who trust your assurance that the ride is safe. Any accident reflects not just on your business reputation, but on your personal character and competence as a craftsman and entertainer. Record keeping for your business is primitive but essential for tracking expenses, revenue, and equipment condition. You might use simple written records to track which villages you visited, what problems occurred, and what repairs are needed. These records help you plan future travel routes, avoid locations where you had problems, and maintain relationships with village authorities who might welcome return visits. Medieval pleasure wheels represent an early form of mechanical entertainment that required enormous skill, courage, and determination to operate successfully. The combination of engineering challenges, safety concerns, customer management, and business logistics made operating a traveling wheel one of the most demanding occupations available to medieval craftsmen. Success required mastery of multiple skills: carpentry, mechanical engineering, customer service, crowd management, and business operations, all without the support systems, safety standards, or legal protections available to modern amusement operators. The people who operated these early pleasure wheels were pioneers in the entertainment industry, developing techniques and technologies that would eventually evolve into modern amusement parks. Their willingness to take enormous personal and financial risks to provide entertainment for medieval communities helped establish the cultural acceptance of mechanical entertainment that continues today. In medieval times, you wouldn't have lasted a day running a pleasure wheel, not because the technology was impossible to understand, but because successful operation required a unique combination of mechanical skill, business acumen, physical courage, and interpersonal abilities that took years to develop. The margin for error was non-existent, the risks were enormous, and the expertise required could only be gained through direct experience with equipment that could kill you if you made mistakes. Modern amusement park operators face strict safety regulations, standardized equipment, and comprehensive legal protections that didn't exist for medieval showmen who literally risked their lives every time they started their wooden wheels spinning through the air. You think your morning routine is elaborate? Try eating breakfast in the Ottoman Empire during the 16th century, where your first meal of the day is a carefully choreographed social ritual that can last for hours, involves food sourced from 3 different continents, and where the wrong choice of bread or the improper way of drinking your coffee could signal everything from your social status to your political allegiances to whether you're properly observing Islamic dietary laws. Picture yourself waking up in Istanbul in 1580 as a member of the Ottoman middle class, perhaps a successful merchant, a mid-level government official, or a skilled craftsman who's prospered under the empire's vast trade networks. Your house overlooks the Bosphorus, and as the first call to prayer echoes across the city from hundreds of minarets, you begin preparing for a breakfast experience that would bewilder modern diners with its complexity, variety, and social significance. The Ottoman breakfast isn't just about nutrition. It's a display of the empire's incredible reach and sophistication. Your morning table will feature ingredients that have traveled from the spice markets of India, the coffee plantations of Yemen, the olive groves of Syria, the wheat fields of Anatolia, and the dairy farms of the Balkans. This isn't possible anywhere else in the world in 1580, because no other empire has the trade networks, administrative systems, and cultural sophistication to bring together such a diverse array of foods for ordinary citizens. Your breakfast preparation begins the night before, because many Ottoman breakfast foods require advanced planning and careful timing. The bread in there will be multiple types of bread needs to be ordered from specific bakers who specialize in different styles. Your household servants have already prepared various preserves, pickles, and dairy products. The coffee beans have been selected, roasted, and ground according to precise specifications that vary depending on your personal preferences and the quality you can afford. But before any food touches the table, your entire household must navigate the complex morning prayers and ablutions that precede every meal in Islamic culture. You rise before dawn for the Fajr prayer, perform your ritual washing with water that's been specifically prepared for religious purposes, and orient yourself toward Mecca while reciting the prayers that structure Ottoman daily life. This isn't a quick routine. The ablutions alone require specific sequences of washing that must be performed in the correct order, with the proper intentions and mental focus. The setting for your breakfast is as important as the food itself. You don't eat in a kitchen or at a simple table. You dine in a specially designated breakfast room or garden pavilion that's been arranged to create the proper atmosphere for this important daily ritual. Low tables are covered with elaborate textiles imported from Bursa, Persia, or Egypt, surrounded by cushions and carpets that demonstrate your family's taste and prosperity. Everything is positioned to take advantage of morning light and any available breezes that might make the meal more comfortable during Istanbul's often humid summers. The room arrangement follows specific principles that reflect both practical needs and cultural values. The most honored position faces away from the kitchen, toward the garden or the best view available. Family hierarchy determines seating arrangements, with the eldest male family member occupying the place of honor, followed by other family members in order of age and gender. Guests, if present, are seated according to their social status and relationship to the family. Even the positioning of serving dishes follows protocols that ensure easy access while maintaining proper order and respect. The bread service alone would overwhelm a modern breakfast table. Ottoman bakers have developed dozens of different bread varieties, each with specific purposes and social meanings. There's pide, a soft flatbread that's perfect for wrapping around other foods or tearing into pieces for sharing. Simit, a circular bread covered with sesame seeds that you'll recognize as the ancestor of the modern bagel, traditionally sold by street vendors who balance enormous trays on their heads while calling out their wares. Francala, a crusty white bread that shows French influence on Ottoman cuisine and indicates your family's cosmopolitan tastes. Churek, a sweet bread braided with eggs and spices for special occasions, requiring hours of preparation and demonstrating the baker's skill. But bread isn't just bread in Ottoman culture. It's a reflection of your religious devotion, social status, and cultural sophistication. The way you break bread, what you eat with it, and how you share it with others all carry meaning that extends far beyond simple nutrition. You begin your meal by blessing the bread, acknowledging its importance as a gift from Allah, and demonstrating your gratitude for the prosperity that allows you to enjoy such variety. Wasting bread is considered both economically foolish and religiously offensive, so every crumb has value and purpose. The bread selection process itself requires expertise that takes years to develop. Different breads have different textures, flavors, and appropriate uses that must be matched to other foods being served. Some breads are better for soaking up oils and sauces, others for wrapping around fillings, still others for eating plain to appreciate their individual characteristics. Your choice of bread sends signals about your sophistication, your regional preferences, and your understanding of proper food combinations. The cheese course presents an array of flavors and textures that reflects the Ottoman Empire's diverse geography and pastoral traditions. There's Bia's Peanir, a white cheese similar to feta that comes from sheep and goat herds in Anatolia, each region producing subtly different versions based on local grasses, climate, and traditional techniques. Kanchkaval, an aged yellow cheese from the Balkans that has a sharp, complex flavor developed through months of careful aging in caves or cellars with specific temperature and humidity conditions. Tulum Peaniri, a cheese aged in goatskin bags that develops unique flavors from the mountain regions where it's produced, with each family of cheesemakers guarding their specific techniques and aging secrets. Each cheese represents not just different regions of the empire, but different techniques passed down through generations of cheesemakers who've perfected their craft through centuries of experimentation and refinement. The quality of cheese on your table reflects your family's connections to specific producers, your knowledge of seasonal variations in cheese quality, and your ability to pay premium prices for the finest examples of each variety. The dairy products extend far beyond simple cheese to include kaymak, a thick, clotted cream that's been carefully skimmed from the surface of slowly heated milk. This delicacy requires precise timing and temperature control that can only be achieved through years of practice. The milk must be heated just enough to create the skin of cream without boiling, then cooled slowly while the cream thickens to the proper consistency. The process can take hours, and its quality reflects both the skill of whoever prepared it and the quality of the milk from which it was made. Kaymak isn't just a spread, it's a luxury item that demonstrates your household sophistication and your cook's expertise. You spread it on bread, mix it with honey for an incredibly rich combination, or eat it plain as a creamy, indulgent start to your day. The best kaymak has a texture like thick whipped cream, but with a more complex flavor that reflects the quality of the milk and the skill of the preparation process. Olives occupy a special place on the Ottoman breakfast table because they represent the empire's Mediterranean heritage and its connection to ancient culinary traditions that predate Islam but have been integrated into Ottoman culture. You're not just eating any olives, You're enjoying varieties that have been cultivated for specific flavors, textures, and preservation methods. Some are small and intensely flavored, others large and mild. Some are preserved in brine that's been seasoned with herbs and spices, others in oil that's been infused with aromatics, still others in special mixtures that have been perfected by individual families or regions. The olive selection process requires knowledge of seasonal availability, regional specialties, and proper preservation techniques. Early harvest olives have different characteristics than late harvest varieties. Olives from different regions of the empire, Syria, Anatolia, the Greek islands, each have distinct flavors and qualities that must be appreciated individually. Your choice of olives reflects your sophistication as a consumer and your household's connections to quality suppliers. The honey selection demonstrates the empire's sophisticated understanding of apiculture and regional specialties that have developed over centuries of beekeeping tradition. Different regions produce honey with distinct flavors based on local flowers, climate, and beekeeping techniques that have been passed down through generations of specialized honey producers. Pine honey from the forests of Anatolia has a dark, resinous flavor that pairs perfectly with strong cheeses and hearty breads. Flower honey from the meadows of Thrace is light and delicate, ideal for mixing with kaymak or spreading on sweetbreads. Chestnut honey from the Black Sea region has a robust, almost bitter taste that sophisticated palates appreciate for its complexity and intensity. Honey isn't just a sweetener in Ottoman culture. It's considered a medicine, a luxury, and a connection to the natural world that's blessed by divine providence. Different honeys are believed to have different health properties, with some varieties considered beneficial for specific ailments or conditions. The quality of honey on your table reflects your family's knowledge of these traditional beliefs and your access to the finest producers throughout the empire. But the real centerpiece of your Ottoman breakfast is coffee, and the coffee service is a ritual so complex and socially significant that it requires its own specialized equipment, techniques, and etiquette that have evolved since coffee first arrived in the Ottoman Empire from Yemen in the early 16th century. Coffee is still exotic enough that serving good coffee marks you as sophisticated, well-traveled, and prosperous. The coffee beans have been roasted that morning in your kitchen, ground by hand in a special mill, and prepared using techniques that are still being perfected by Ottoman coffee masters. The coffee preparation process is as much performance as practical necessity, requiring skill, timing, and attention that can only be developed through years of practice. The beans are roasted in small batches over carefully controlled charcoal heat, with constant stirring using a long-handled spoon to ensure even browning and optimal flavor development. The roasting process requires understanding of how different bean varieties respond to heat, when to stop roasting to achieve the desired flavor profile, and how to cool the beans quickly to preserve the roasting results. The roasted beans are ground using a cylindrical mill made from brass or wood, with precisely engineered grinding surfaces that produce a powder fine enough to create the thick, strong brew that defines Ottoman coffee. The grinding process requires skill and patience because the consistency of the grind affects both the flavor and the texture of the finished coffee. Too coarse, and the coffee will be weak and thin. Too fine, and it will be bitter and muddy. The grinding must be done immediately before brewing to preserve the coffee's aromatic oils and flavors. Brewing Ottoman coffee requires a special pot called a sedzvi, made from copper or brass and designed with specific proportions that heat the coffee and water mixture slowly and evenly. The sedzvi's shape isn't arbitrary mere. The narrow neck and wide bottom create specific heat distribution patterns that are essential for proper coffee preparation. The coffee is brewed over charcoal or a small fire, with constant attention to prevent burning or boiling too rapidly. The process can take 15 or 20 minutes, and the person preparing the coffee must watch carefully for the moment when the coffee begins to foam, indicating that it's ready to serve. The brewing process requires understanding of ratios between coffee, water, and sugar that vary depending on personal preferences and social customs. Some prefer their coffee sweet, others medium, still others bitter without any sugar at all. The amount of coffee used affects both strength and texture. The timing of when to remove the coffee from heat determines whether the brew will have the proper foam and consistency that marks expertly prepared coffee. The coffee service itself follows strict protocols that demonstrate respect for the drink and for your guests. Coffee is served in small cups made from porcelain or precious metals, accompanied by glasses of cold water to cleanse the palate and prepare it for the coffee's intense flavors. The person serving coffee must present it with the right hand, and recipients accept it with expressions of gratitude that acknowledge both the quality of the coffee and the effort required to prepare it properly. The coffee drinking ritual involves specific etiquette for holding the cup, sipping the coffee, and expressing appreciation for its quality. You don't gulp coffee like a modern commuter grabbing caffeine on the go. You sip it slowly, allowing time to appreciate its aroma, flavor, and the social interaction that surrounds its consumption. The coffee service creates opportunities for conversation, business discussion, and social bonding that are as important as the caffeine and flavor the coffee provides. Your breakfast includes an array of preserved foods that showcase Ottoman mastery of food preservation techniques and the empire's extensive trade connections with regions throughout Asia, Africa, and Europe. There are various tertiary minis pickled vegetables that might include cabbage, turnips, carrots, or cucumbers, each prepared with different spice mixtures and aging processes that create complex, tangy flavors. These pickles serve both as palate cleansers and as sources of vitamins during winter months, when fresh vegetables are scarce. The pickling process itself represents sophisticated understanding of fermentation, preservation, and flavor development that has been refined over generations of Ottoman cooks. Different vegetables require different brining solutions, spice combinations, and aging periods to achieve optimal results. The timing of when to begin eating pickled vegetables affects their texture and flavor. Some are best consumed immediately after preparation, others improve with weeks or months of aging. The jam and preserve selection reflects seasonal abundance preserved for year-round enjoyment through techniques that have been perfected by Ottoman households over centuries of experience. Rose petal jam captures the essence of Ottoman rose gardens in a sweet, fragrant spread that's as much perfume as food, requiring careful selection of petals, precise cooking techniques, and proper storage methods to maintain its delicate flavor and aroma. Fig jam from the Mediterranean regions provides concentrated sweetness and complex flavors that develop through slow cooking processes that can take entire days to complete properly. Quince preserve offers a unique taste that's both sweet and slightly astringent, requiring specific preparation techniques to soften the fruit's tough texture while preserving its distinctive flavor. Each preserve represents months of careful preparation, from selecting the finest fruits at peak ripeness to perfecting the cooking and preservation processes that ensure the preserves will maintain their quality throughout the year. The preserve making process requires understanding of sugar ratios, cooking temperatures, and preservation techniques that prevent spoilage while maintaining flavor and texture. Too little sugar and the preserves will spoil quickly. Too much and the fruit flavors will be overwhelmed. The cooking process must be carefully controlled to achieve the proper consistency without burning or overcooking. Proper storage requires appropriate containers, sealing techniques, and storage conditions that maintain quality for months. Eggs appear on your breakfast table, prepared in ways that demonstrate both Ottoman culinary creativity and the influence of various cultural traditions within the empire's diverse population. Menemen, scrambled eggs cooked with tomatoes and peppers, shows the influence of New World vegetables that have recently arrived through Ottoman trade networks and have been adapted to local tastes and cooking techniques. The dish requires precise timing to achieve the proper texture of eggs, while maintaining the fresh flavors of the vegetables. Silba, poached eggs served over yogurt with spiced butter, demonstrates the sophisticated sauce-making techniques that distinguish Ottoman cuisine from simpler cooking traditions. The dish requires perfectly poached eggs with runny yolks, thick yogurt that won't separate when heated, and spiced butter that's been prepared with the right combination of herbs and spices to complement both eggs and yogurt. The presentation must be both visually appealing and functionally practical for eating. The egg preparation techniques reflect Ottoman understanding of cooking methods that maximize flavor while creating visually appealing presentations. Different egg dishes are appropriate for different occasions, seasons, and social contexts. Some are simple enough for daily consumption, others elaborate enough for special occasions or honored guests. The yogurt service is particularly important because yogurt represents both nutritional wisdom and cultural identity in Ottoman society. The yogurt isn't just any dairy product, it's been prepared using specific bacterial cultures and aging techniques that create the thick, tangy product that Ottomans prefer. The cultures used for yogurt making are carefully maintained and passed down through generations of families, with each household developing its own distinctive flavors and characteristics. Yogurt preparation requires understanding of milk quality, bacterial cultures, temperature control, and aging processes that affect both flavor and texture. The milk must be heated to specific temperatures to create the proper environment for bacterial growth, then cooled to temperatures that allow the cultures to thrive without being killed by excessive heat. The aging process requires proper containers, storage conditions, and timing that produces yogurt with the desired consistency and flavor. The yogurt is served plain, mixed with herbs, or used as a base for various breakfast dishes. Different presentations require different preparation techniques and serving methods. Plain yogurt showcases the quality of the preparation process. Herbed yogurt demonstrates the cook's knowledge of flavor combinations. Yogurt-based dishes show culinary creativity and technical skill. Your breakfast includes various burek pastries filled with cheese, herbs, or meat that demonstrate the Ottoman mastery of layered dough techniques that have been developed through centuries of culinary innovation. These aren't simple pastries, but complex constructions that require rolling paper-thin sheets of dough, layering them with fillings, and baking them to create flaky, delicious results that showcase both technical skill and artistic presentation. The burek making process requires understanding of dough preparation, rolling techniques, filling combinations, and baking methods that produce the characteristic layers and textures that define quality burek. The dough must be prepared with the right flour, water, and oil ratios to achieve the proper elasticity and strength. The rolling process requires skill and patience to create sheets thin enough to see through without tearing. Different types of burek are appropriate for different occasions, and your choice reflects both personal preference and social awareness. Some burek varieties are considered more sophisticated or difficult to prepare, while others are more casual or everyday foods. The quality of burek on your table reflects your household's culinary capabilities and your family's appreciation for fine food. The herb and vegetable selection on your Ottoman breakfast table is more extensive than most modern salad bars, featuring fresh herbs and vegetables that provide both flavor and nutritional balance to complement the rich dairy products and breads. Fresh herbs like parsley, mint, dill, and cilantro are arranged in small bowls for diners to add to other foods or eat plain. Each herb has specific flavor properties and traditional uses that enhance different foods and provide digestive benefits. Sliced tomatoes, cucumbers, and onions provide fresh flavors that complement the rich dairy products and breads while adding moisture and crunch that creates textural variety in the meal. These vegetables aren't just garnishes, they're integral parts of the meal that provide nutritional balance and palate-cleansing properties that enhance the overall breakfast experience. The vegetable preparation requires understanding of selection, cutting techniques, and presentation methods that maximize both visual appeal and flavor. The vegetables must be selected for optimal ripeness and quality, cut to appropriate sizes for easy eating, and arranged in ways that encourage consumption while maintaining freshness throughout the meal. Tea service runs parallel to coffee service throughout your breakfast, because Ottoman society has embraced both beverages and developed distinct cultures around each that reflect different social contexts and personal preferences. The tea isn't the simple bag in hot water affair of modern times, but a carefully prepared brew using specific tea varieties, precise steeping times, and proper serving techniques that have been developed through decades of experimentation with tea preparation methods. Tea preparation requires understanding of water quality, temperature control, steeping techniques, and serving methods that produce tea with optimal flavor and aroma. The water must be heated to specific temperatures that vary depending on the tea variety being prepared. The steeping time affects both strength and flavor, with over-steeping producing bitter tea and under-steeping producing weak, flavorless results. Tea glasses are small and delicate, designed to concentrate the tea's aroma and allow drinkers to appreciate its color and clarity while protecting hands from heat. The glass design affects both the drinking experience and the social presentation of tea service. Different glass styles are appropriate for different occasions and social contexts. The timing of your Ottoman breakfast is carefully choreographed to create a leisurely, social experience rather than a hurried consumption of calories. You don't rush through courses, but take time to appreciate each element, engage in conversation with family members or guests, and properly observe the social rituals that make breakfast a civilized affair rather than mere feeding. This pacing reflects Ottoman values that prioritize social harmony, cultural refinement, and proper appreciation of life's pleasures. The meal progression follows specific patterns that balance different flavors, textures, and nutritional elements, while creating opportunities for conversation and social interaction. Certain foods are traditionally eaten first to prepare the palate for others. Some foods are consumed throughout the meal, while others are saved for specific moments. The progression creates a structured experience that enhances both enjoyment and digestion. Serving and eating etiquette during your breakfast follows complex rules that reflect Islamic dietary laws, Ottoman social customs, and practical considerations for group dining. You use your right hand for eating and passing food, leaving your left hand for less ceremonial tasks. You share food from common plates in ways that ensure everyone gets appropriate portions while maintaining cleanliness and social harmony. You express gratitude for the food and acknowledge the efforts of those who prepared it. The etiquette rules extend beyond simple manners to encompass religious observances, social hierarchies, and cultural values that are reinforced through daily breakfast rituals. Proper behavior at breakfast demonstrates your understanding of Islamic principles, Ottoman customs, and family values that extend far beyond the breakfast table into all aspects of social interaction. The conversation during your Ottoman breakfast is as important as the food itself, because this meal serves as a daily opportunity for family bonding, information sharing, and social connection that strengthens relationships and maintains community ties. Topics might include business matters, family news, community events, or political developments that affect your daily life. The breakfast setting provides a relaxed environment for discussing important matters without the formality of other social occasions. Conversation topics follow informal protocols that respect family hierarchies, social relationships, and cultural sensitivities while encouraging open communication and mutual support. Business discussions are appropriate, but shouldn't dominate family time. Family matters are important, but must be balanced with respect for privacy and individual dignity. Community news provides opportunities for shared concern and collective problem solving. Cleanup after your Ottoman breakfast is a significant undertaking that involves multiple household members and careful attention to preserving leftovers and maintaining equipment. The various serving dishes, glasses, and utensils must be cleaned using appropriate methods for different materials. Metal items require different cleaning techniques than ceramic pieces. Delicate items need special handling to prevent damage. Leftover food gets stored using preservation techniques that will keep it fresh for later meals. Bread is wrapped in cloths and stored in dry locations. Dairy products are kept in cool places. Preserves and pickles are returned to their sealed containers. Nothing is wasted, and proper storage ensures that food maintains its quality for future consumption. The breakfast room must be cleaned and prepared for other daily activities. Carpets and cushions are cleaned and aired. Tables are cleared and wiped down. The room is arranged for its next use, whether that's receiving guests, conducting business, or serving other meals. The cleanup process maintains household standards and prepares for continuing daily activities. The seasonal variations in your Ottoman breakfast reflect the empire's agricultural cycles and the availability of different ingredients throughout the year. Spring brings fresh herbs and early vegetables that have been missed during winter months, creating opportunities for renewed flavors and improved nutrition after months of relying primarily on preserved foods. The arrival of spring produce is celebrated and incorporated into breakfast menus with enthusiasm and appreciation. Summer offers abundant fruits and vegetables that can be enjoyed fresh or preserved for later use. The hot weather affects both food preferences and preservation requirements. Lighter, cooler foods become more appealing, while preservation activities intensify to capture summer abundance for winter consumption. The breakfast menu adapts to seasonal availability while maintaining variety and nutritional balance. Fall provides the harvest abundance that will sustain your family through winter, requiring intensive preservation activities and careful menu planning to ensure adequate variety throughout the cold months. The breakfast table begins featuring more preserved foods, while fresh items become increasingly precious and carefully used. Winter relies heavily on preserved foods, stored grains, and imported ingredients that maintain variety during the lean months, when local agriculture is dormant. The breakfast becomes a showcase for preservation skills and trade connections that bring imported foods from warmer climates. Planning and resource management become crucial for maintaining adequate nutrition and enjoyment throughout winter. Regional variations within the Ottoman Empire mean that breakfast customs differ significantly, depending on your location and local traditions. Istanbul breakfast reflects the cosmopolitan influences of the imperial capital and the availability of ingredients from throughout the empire. The capital's position as a trade center means access to the widest variety of ingredients and the most sophisticated preparation techniques. Provincial breakfasts might emphasize local specialties and traditional foods that have been adapted to Ottoman customs while maintaining regional character. Different regions have access to different ingredients, different climate conditions, and different cultural influences that shape local breakfast traditions. These variations create diversity within the broader Ottoman breakfast culture. Coastal regions feature more seafood and Mediterranean influences, while inland areas focus on pastoral products and grain-based foods. Mountain regions might emphasize preserved foods and hearty preparations, while river valleys might feature fresh produce and lighter preparations. The regional variations reflect local resources, climate conditions, and cultural histories. The economic significance of your Ottoman breakfast extends far beyond personal nutrition to encompass trade networks, agricultural systems, and craft industries that employ thousands of people throughout the empire. The bread requires wheat farmers, millers, and bakers. The dairy products depend on herders, cheesemakers, and transportation networks. The coffee involves international trade, specialized merchants, and skilled preparers. Your breakfast table represents a complex economic ecosystem that spans continents and supports countless livelihoods. The economic impact extends from local producers to international traders, from agricultural workers to urban craftsmen, from transportation networks to retail merchants. The breakfast economy demonstrates the empire's sophisticated commercial systems and global reach. The economic relationships involved in breakfast production create interdependencies that affect political stability, social relationships, and cultural development throughout the empire. Disruptions in trade networks, agricultural production, or craft industries can affect breakfast quality and availability, which in turn affects social satisfaction and political stability. Religious observances influence various aspects of your Ottoman breakfast, from the blessing of bread to the timing of meals during religious holidays and fasting periods. During Ramadan, breakfast becomes the pre-dawn meal that must sustain you through a day of fasting, requiring careful selection of foods that provide lasting energy and nutrition without causing thirst or discomfort during daylight hours. Religious dietary laws affect food preparation, combination of ingredients, and proper expressions of gratitude for divine provision. Islamic principles guide decisions about food sources, preparation methods, and consumption practices. The breakfast table becomes a daily opportunity for expressing religious devotion and demonstrating proper Islamic behavior. Religious holidays and observances create special breakfast requirements and opportunities. Different holidays might call for specific foods, preparation methods, or social customs that enhance religious significance while maintaining nutritional and social functions. The breakfast serves both spiritual and practical purposes throughout the religious calendar. Social status is constantly displayed and negotiated through breakfast choices, from the quality of ingredients to the sophistication of preparation techniques, to the elegance of serving methods. Wealthy Ottomans can afford rare ingredients, employ skilled cooks, and maintain elaborate breakfast services that demonstrate their prosperity and refinement. These displays serve both personal satisfaction and social communication functions. Middle-class families like yours balance aspirations for sophistication with practical economic constraints. Your breakfast choices reflect both your desire to participate in Ottoman high culture and your need to manage household resources responsibly. The balance between aspiration and practicality creates distinctive middle-class breakfast customs. Lower-class breakfasts focus on basic nutrition while still observing cultural customs within their means. Even modest Ottoman breakfasts maintain certain standards and traditions that distinguish them from simple feeding. The cultural importance of breakfast transcends economic boundaries while acknowledging practical limitations. In the Ottoman Empire, you wouldn't have lasted a day trying to eat breakfast, because the social complexity, cultural knowledge, and practical skills required to navigate Ottoman breakfast customs took years to master. Every choice about food, timing, service, and etiquette carried social meaning that could affect your reputation, relationships, and opportunities within Ottoman society. The breakfast table was a daily stage where social status, cultural competence, and personal character were constantly displayed and evaluated. Modern breakfast seems almost barbarically simple compared to the sophisticated ritual that Ottomans created around their first meal of the day.